The people of Sheffield were confident back then, believing that this bustling steel industry of northern England would sustain their lives for decades to come. Well, now we know that's an illusion. No offense, but the steel industry has collapsed. Of course, the big difference between Hoogkaterijnen and the Sheffield Steelworks are that Hoogkaterijnen is still being used. Of course, the steel mills in Sheffield are empty, but still, nonetheless, they are different in this kind of thing, but still you can use them both for transmedial storytelling in urban landscapes. Now, like I just said, it was an illusion. There wasn't going to be a big bustling steel industry for 50 more years to come. So, what happens when people get disillusioned? They don't want to be remembered about their troubled past. They're like, let's just forget about it and never think about that horrible thing again. And just like the Rock right here, he is utterly devastated. Now, the thing is, I chose this little slide to actually connect with the young people just like myself. I love these memes. And they're both actually the same. This one tells the story of the Sheffield Steelworks. This one tells the story of Hoogkaterijnen. I'm glad we're finally going to Sheffield. I'm going to be a steel worker just like my granddad. All the steel mills are gone. Oh no. Well, same goes for the other one. Right, can I have the next slide, please? And eventually, these three pictures is all that remains. A barren urban landscape. Well, barren, sure, I'm dramatizing this a little bit, but still it's nothing like it used to be. The best thing in this case, and I think both the English as well as the Dutch will agree, is demolishing or renovating the place, so that good things can occur once more. There is just one thing people are forgetting here, and that is to ask questions. Questions like, what is to tell? What happened? And of course, what is here to learn? Every failed building, or even the ones that didn't fail, like the Colosseum, maybe the Colosseum failed as well, because it's in ruins right now. Either way, every building tells a story, but the most interesting one, in our opinion, is the ones that fail. And this is where the transmedial storytelling gets important, so pay attention. Of course, you could just show us we could just show you a documentary about the building, about society, or much more. Wait a minute, I'm skipping a thing. Excuse me. But yeah, we could just show you a documentary about the place. That's right. We could show you a documentary about the place, or perform a play in the building, like an empty steel mill. Great. We could do that, but does that communicate the whole story? Sure, you can have an opinion about it, but have you smelled the place? Have you touched the place? Have you heard the place? And I mean, really, have you heard the scenery sounds within the building? Well, like I just said, you could establish your opinion about the building, society, much more, but does it translate how you feel? When we make a documentary, does it really perfectly translate how we feel about it? Does it invite the people to experience the building when you're watching at your television screen watching a documentary about Chernobyl? Maybe it invokes the people, but have they really seen it? Have they really been there? No. Picture or play, in our view, is not enough. Therefore, we feel that transmedial storytelling is one of the best strategies to use in these kind of situations. We will explain to you how we tried to achieve this and what we think is important for you to remember. Both things that went well as things that went utterly wrong. So, the first thing yes, I made steps for you. Can I have the next slide, please, by the way? Step one, we made steps. Well, and before I'm going to tell you what this slide stands for, let me tell you that this approach, the approach that we went through, is kind of a sketching on a drawing table. It's basically exactly what we did. We sketched the whole thing first. But this process brings along some difficulties, which I will explain later on. So keep in mind that this is just one way of viewing things, and this could be a guideline in your creative process. Just once more, it is a research. We chose to go this way. We've been searching for a framework to implement our ideas, and it has become a building. And if you choose to do so, we recommend to follow these steps. Well, like you can see right here, the first step is choose a contemporary building or location. We chose Hoge Katerijnen. Why? Because it's rejected by the inhabitants. People think it's repulsive, and we thought actually, that's the most interesting part, we thought it was ugly. In your case, you could go to Leeds, for example. I've never been to Leeds, so no offense, but I've Googled Leeds.
It's actually quite nice as well. Huh? Leeds is also very beautiful.
Well, I actually wanted to find something in York, but the city is way too beautiful. Well, you can go to Leeds. Search for some empty housing. Because people think it's sad. People feel compassionateness because it's such a waste. Or else we think it's such a waste. Or another place in Leeds, an abandoned steel mill. It represents nostalgia, history. And it represents that because we feel this used to be something. Right. When you've done that, next slide please. Right, Homer has actually nothing to do with it, but I thought it would make the presentation more colorful. Well, ask yourselves some very important questions. Like, justify your fascination with the location or building. It's very important. What's your opinion or emotion considering the location or building? Why have you chosen this building or location exactly? And what does my imagination do? What are my fantasies regarding the building or location? Well, can I have the next slide, please? Step 2A, B and C will follow, is define the past, the present, and the future. It's pretty straightforward, actually. What went down here? Why was it built? What was the original purpose? The past, the present, for what purpose is it used now? Maybe none at all. What's the general consensus regarding it? What do people think? Do they think it's ugly? Do they think it's beautiful? Do they want it demolished or renovated? And in the future, what is going to happen in the future? Well, renovated, demolished, maybe a new function. And what is your position in all this? What do you think about it? What do you think should happen? And what do you think about what happened in the past? What do you think what's happening right now? And like I just said before, it sounds pretty straightforward, but it's important. Why? Because you have to familiarize yourself with the facts. Because these facts might provide you with the necessary inspiration. For example, I thought that Hoge Katerijnen, our shopping mall, was just ugly. Nothing more. Just an ugly beast waiting for renovation. But as we researched this whole building, we found out that the most horrible things happened here, like homeless people or drug users who were abusing substance all over the place, slept all over the place, did the most crazy things. Well, and that kind of make things more important, or important might not be the right word, but it makes things more interesting to me, more fascinating. It creates necessity for me to tell something. And that's very important about the research about the premise, property or building. Well, can I have the next slide, please? Step 2B, ask some more questions of importance. You should ask yourself the same questions as you did in step 1 again, because they might have changed. And after you've done that, something very vital comes into picture, and that is the audience and the experience. And what would you like the audience to experience? How do you want the audience to leave the property? How do you want to let the audience experience so that they feel how you feel? How do you want to express yourself in telling a story? Would you like to use dance, theater, film, performance arts. Try to think in this way as broad as you can. Try to invent a whole new framework for your experience. Everything is possible. You can use digital art, digital media to analog media, and actually you can use media and you could use a brick or a bottle, for example. Try to take everything as much as you can from this building and try to use it. We've experienced that in our process we haven't used everything. We did a tryout last Friday and our audience, they saw stuff and they wondered, well, why haven't I seen anything about this? That's very important. Try to use everything, or not try to consider using everything. I just told you about a framework, step 2C, personify. Next slide please, excuse me. Our framework was to build a character that represents our building. It's a strategy which we've chosen in particular. Personify the property. Actually, this is my quote, which you can see here. Buildings tell a piece of history. Buildings that tell a piece of history are always exciting. Why not create history when a building is like a blank sheet of paper, like a contemporary building? For example, the framework. Once again, back to the framework. The Brandenburg Gate, which you can see right here, could just be the Brandenburg Gate. But what if it's a man who saw the city of Berlin getting ripped to pieces when the wall was built at the steps of the gate? Maybe the Brandenburg Gate, if it was a man, maybe it holds a grudge against the world, or society. The character could be negative. Well, why did he do this? Because we think audience can relate themselves to a character better than just a mere building. You've also created this way. You've also created your first step in building the transmedial world. A character can communicate via Facebook, Twitter, film, other types of media. It has a voice and an opinion. The thing here is that we've experienced firsthand that defining a character is harder than it seems. Up until this day, we've had discussions about who Catherine, that's our character, really is. There are different dramaturgical viewpoints considering a character, especially when you're working with game designers, theatre makers, playwrights, and set designers. The most important thing here in this process is that you have to try to reach a concession about what a character really is, to avoid discussion in a later stage and what this character represents. Right, can I have the next slide please? This is how we really went to work, and I'm also going to explain to you which difficulties we encountered. So, let's continue. Apart from building a concept, we've experienced a fun, stressful, inspirational, and energy-consuming and energy-giving process. I've tried to piece together the puzzle pieces and explain how we arrived to where we are now. First, we've defined our event. Sort of like a platform, a framework. Where do we start? Where do we want our audience to start, and what kind of information do we want to give away ahead? Essentially, this is building our transmedia world. Things like time, title, and the how and what. Well, it's to describe the things that we want the audience to be curious about, like I just said, giving the information in advance. Basically, we chose, that's where you're right now, we chose a pop-up store in the mall to function as our home base. The audience will start here and end the experience here. Also, we've invited all of our visitors via Facebook, thus presenting Catherine as a character. And that's kind of like what I tried to show you in this slide, is that you can, even before anything starts, you can create the transmedial world by using Facebook, Twitter, or Conductor. You can let the character you've created communicate with the outside world. And that way you can accomplish that that our group, for example, is completely invisible to the audience. We haven't done that we tried to do that in our project, but basically we didn't got round to it. That's the problem. There was you could say lack of time, lack of I would say lack of time. Lack of time, lack of knowledge. I think that's the accurate word. Okay, next slide please. After we've defined the character and reached a consensus about what we want to tell, we split apart in 5 groups. Each group was given the task to conjure up a concept of their own, like an audio tour, elevator tour, pervasive game and documentary. In this way, a sort of inventory of different ideas, all linked to the original premise, was created. In this method, which is highly effective in creating new ideas fast, lies a potential danger. When your group consists of various theatrical disciplines, everyone will develop their own ideas about the premise, especially about the character and about the building itself. The problem was in this stage that we had to find the link between the sub-concepts all over again. You can avoid this problem by gathering stories way before you've done any other difficult, painstaking work. For example, you can just go ahead, create stories, maybe create 10, 20 subgroups, just inventorize, and then search for a link between those things, and then create a dramaturgy instead of, or a character, instead of creating the character first and then split up. You can see in this slide what kind of happened. We created different groups who made their own sub-concept, reducing the workload. Everybody developed their own perception of character and premise. Highly effective, but might not be the best idea. 3, form. When the link between the 4, we made 4 sub-concepts. When the link between the 4 sub-concepts was established once more, we could begin thinking about a suitable form to present it all, thus making the experience complete. We chose a tour through different parts of the building so we could show the different sides of our character. It's very important to keep track of each other in this stage. The story or concept might be satisfactory, but does that apply to the form as well? In other words, can you still relate all the media you've created to each other? Yeah, a lot of us were working on their own island, which is great, that increases productivity, but you have to experiment as well, don't forget that. The suggestion I would like to make is that it should be mandatory to meet every week and do the whole experience. This way you can physically test if everything is still in check and balance, and if not, you can go to work on that. Like I said in the slide, be sure to experience each other's experiences. Don't be scared of criticism or the fact that your form isn't working like you thought it would. It's a great way of trying new things. You have to be in the field for this. Do 4 tryouts a week if you have to. So, yeah, really, maybe not just the whole tryout of the whole thing, but just little parts, and let other people know what you are doing. That's vital. So new ways of storytelling can develop, because this is also very important, that new ways of storytelling can develop, because maybe if you see stuff from other people, even if it is in your group, you can, well, it's a magic word, create synergy, so that person A has this idea, person B has that idea, and when that merges, you might come out on top. Right, next slide please. Dramaturgy, linking it all together. Well, it's kind of a sequel of the last slide. Dramaturgy. Finding a suitable form has a lot to do with dramaturgy. By creating a transmedial world and linking all these sub-concepts together, you have to find a dramaturgical form that justifies all of the choices made. This was the hardest part. Just a few days ago we did a tryout, like I just said, of our original concept and things did not quite work out. A lot of things were unclear to the audience. In the last few days we've changed a whole bunch of things. The most interesting thing is that we didn't really alter the sub-concepts, but we just went to work on the dramaturgy. And hereby I mean that we conferred if the dramaturgy is still in check with the form. Just like I just said, does the form still justifies the dramaturgy, and can we explain the form with the dramaturgy? It kind of, it's a very thin line you have to walk on, but we mixed the order of the presentation and we were searching for a format that would increase the sense of immersion, because that was lacking. And that was the dramaturgy which we wanted to create. Immersion and telling the story. Maybe when you go from A to B, it doesn't create immersion. But when you go from B to A, maybe that does create immersion. Try to investigate that. Maybe you just haven't got the order of things right, but you got the things right, but not the order of things. Try to look what happens when you mix this order. That's basically what we did, and we hope it is going to go well, because it's actually 11 a.m. in the morning, and about 45 minutes we're going to do the thing, so I'll let you know. Well, the next slide please. This is actually something we came up yesterday. It's a bit abstract, I must confess. But the thing is, every thingy must support every other thing. Like, the sub-concepts can be created so that they can make the dramaturgy easier. And the dramaturgy must clarify and link the sub-concepts. So when you got these sub-concepts, they can make your dramaturgy easier to think about your dramaturgy. And when this is clear, then you can go back to your sub-concepts and see if they still justify the framework you've created. For example, the form will make the dramaturgy more apparent, and the dramaturgy will fill in the question that could rise when looking at the form itself, and so on and so on. I just had a discussion about this and I wrote it down really quickly, and I'm afraid I can't read it anymore, but let me try it. That the framework, yes, what is the framework exactly? In our presentation or in our research, it's the character, but it could also be anything else. Or the framework is the flyers that you send out, the platform you create to build your world upon. The dramaturgy is how you fill this in. How does the character react? What do people see? Why do they see it? But the form speaks for itself, and the sub-concepts you can fill that in yourself. And yeah, like I just said, the most important thing is that down, boy. The most important thing is that I want to use the Dutch word versterken. Jongens, help me out here. Reinforce, thank you. Is that the framework reinforces dramaturgy, the dramaturgy reinforces the framework, and so on, and so on, and so on. Next slide, please. That's the last slide. Thank you for listening. As you see, it's being demolished. Very sad. Any questions from the initiators, the coaches, the audience, anyone else in the pub?
Kind of in English?
Well,
Okay.
please, yeah.
Could you go one back, because I have...
This one.
Because I came in later, but the sub-context concepts you mean by what these different groups... Or,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that's exactly
Within
one.
these concepts there also is a form and the dramaturgy framework, so...
Well, That's an interesting question. Alternatively, you could look at these sub-concepts as if they were media, like film, play, any other stuff, Facebook. Of course, these sub-concepts could have their miniature dramaturgy within them, but still, it has to be linked to the main dramaturgy. I hope I'm being clear on this.
Can you once more tell a little bit what you think framework stands for?
What framework stands for? Well, I think it's still pretty abstract. Well, let me try this. In my opinion, everything starts with a basic idea. Like, I can remember that you teach me about playwriting, and you gave us these newspaper articles. And based on these newspaper articles, we had to write our play. Try to look at it that way, for example. My framework in my play was those two boys trapped in a swamp. Hope you can remember.
I will never forget.
Never forget those boys in the swamp. Well, that was my framework to build my world upon. Like the newspaper article, like the character, like the maybe when people from York want to do something at a festival, and that is the festival grounds and the. For example, the Transmedia Festival. Say like you want to do something at the Transmedia Festival. Is it in York? Do you know what I mean? There is this festival in York. Oh yeah, Nottingham. Well, this festival in Nottingham. When you, for example, you have no idea. Let's just take the festival grounds. What happens at this festival as your framework? Try to look at it that way. Is it clear?
Yes, is it in your project? Was it simply the fact of the metaphor of looking at Hoogkaterijn as a character? Is that your framework?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perspective, maybe also, which can be content or form. But it also could have been, the framework also could have been, for instance, dramaturgy. You mean it's a start point, it can also be a premise, for instance, from which you work on.
Yeah,
or a theme, or...
the overall concept.
Yeah, the overall concept. The
That's
theme,
the
I think the
overall
theme
concept,
is a
actually.
great way
Yeah.
of putting it. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I have another question about participation and interaction. Because it seems that you emphasize the storyline and the experience of a pre-written, directed experience.
That's
And I'm
correct.
curious what your reflections as a group, so maybe you should also ask your colleagues.
Yeah, I think
don't
that's a
want to
great
put
idea.
you in
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
as a representative of the group. But so what are your, because I don't see it back in the reflections in your presentation, what are your findings when you think about participation and interaction of the audience within this context?
Well, I want to say something about that and then invite. No, come on, you can do this. Come on. I want to invite our director in a few seconds. Well, it's very interesting this because a lot of us think that because we were working with 3 theatre makers and 3 playwrights, that it kind of went this natural way that we were focusing on the narrative part of this whole story, and that the immersion and the interaction between the audience and the whole experience was kind of overshadowed by this. But Roland, can you explain a little bit more about this? Because you are the immersion and interaction specialist.
Well, there you go.
Hey, now you go.
why we chose a linear concept.
Yeah, and why the interaction came was
Well,
a bit
it's not
overshadowed.
only linear, it might be multilinear because you got two lines potentially. But it doesn't seem to matter at all what I am doing as an audience member for the story and story development.
For story and story
But that
development.
is changed also now. So
Okay, but then I'd like to hear the reflection on
on
these
this,
changes.
this last changes,
Yeah.
Before you actually gonna
Yeah, that's
experience
it's
them,
just-
because actually
I
that's
guess
why
it's
we
a
chose
spoiler
to
then.
leave it a bit
Yeah.
out, because then he's actually gonna give the kind of all the decisions made the last days. So
Okay, sorry, so there's still a presentation after the experience explaining the difference between last week and this week.
well,
No, I think to make it simple, I think maybe you can tell a bit more about what we talked in the weekend, the reason why we made like divergent lines,
it changes.
and about the idea of making it complementary to each other, because I think that's also in line with your asking.
But then you're actually giving away what you're gonna experience. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
okay, but I think it's a bit. I mean, the reason why we left it out is last discussing it because you first have to experience it, and then of course the reflection also is not there immediately. So
And I have another question.
yeah, maybe.
Perhaps it's I'm interested in your experience of dealing with this problem.
Yeah.
I don't need to know
The exact.
Exactly what it's
what
gonna
it's
be.
gonna
Okay.
be,
That
but
is.
how it is.
Well then.
We want to
Coping with
give
this
them freedom to explore Katerijn in their own time and in their own way. But because we are now presenting this concept in a small matter of time, there's no way to freely go your own way on this time. And we want to let you guys experience the whole concept and our intentions with it, but it's not able to have a free sense of interaction, because then it would go too slow.
Okay.
I can tell you. Yes, you have to dive in your own rhythm, and now we're just giving you this rhythm. Saying this correct. It's in Dutch it's much easier to explain.
So you're saying one of the design dilemmas is that when you ask people to become creative in finding their own way or making decisions or starting to immerse themselves in this world, you lose a direction of the actual time.
Yes,
And rhythm.
Yeah, and timing.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Other aspects that you thought was in your process of decision making relevant?
Not to think of right now. Yeah, it would take too long to fully get immersed by our concept.
No.
To experience the whole concept. If you want to make it freely interactive in your own rhythm, so that's
Okay.
my argument.
I do feel the need to reflect upon the difference then between last week and next week. If there's some substantial design choices made, I think it's
Well,
important.
there are many, but I mean we've been working they're all still working actually on it. So
Yeah.
until this moment, so I think they first need to experience it now, and then for sure it's going to be in our last output.
Yeah, there will be an after talk after the experience.
Right, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Then I don't have any more questions.
I have one question, because you say it's like when you make it interactive now, you would lose grip on time. But would that also be like if you had 2 years to work on this? Could you design something that you would have grip on, but the audience still would feel free to experience for themselves? Is this really a timing thing inside this project, or could it, or is it algemeen? Like, yeah, is it lack of design time, or is it does this always count like this?
It not always counts. We chose to present this in one day, so it's kind of our own. We set ourselves stuck at this moment because if we had 3 days time, you have had more time to interact with this whole story world, and we could interact with you in these 3 days of time. Now we also chose to give a presentation date. You've all come together to experience it. That's also a design format because our initial goal was to stumble upon our story world. Something. Oh, I didn't know this is what a part of this, and this is not a part of this. So that takes a lot of time to stumble upon more and more and more.
So what you're also saying is that the context of this particular end presentation is countering the type of experience you would actually like to design,
Yeah.
where people sort of not knowing but slowly immersing in this story world can happen anytime, any place, so to
Yeah.
speak.
So the timing of the presentation, not only the timing of time you have to design it.
But note, this was our initiate concept, so we have changed a lot. So yeah, let's go. Let's experience.
Okay.
I would say.
Could you maybe, I don't know what the time is, maybe one last question. Could you tell a little bit more about the environment it's taking place in? Because Eva already mentioned the difference between like an abandoned space as like an empty steelworks, but a place like Hoog Catharijne, and I imagine there are a lot of places like old shopping malls in England as well. They are still being used and are still being maintained. How did that impact your design and production process? Did it impact your design process?
Because it was being used, you mean?
Because I can imagine it's not a space you can just walk into and use to your liking.
Right.
It had its limits.
Yeah.
Tell a bit
Well,
about the limits.
I think definitely, because we really stumbled on some difficulties regarding what we can use, how we can use it, and yeah, that might be not a real sufficient argument, but still, I think if we had another 2 months, maybe we would come up with a genius concept, and then we could convince the real estate guys right here that we have to do this, and maybe we could pay them more, I don't know, but I think when you choose an empty steel mill, you can do much more than a real life shopping mall. But the thing is, I think a shopping mall where there are still people walking around makes it much more interesting. And makes it...
Why?
Why? Well, I think because it still lives, because it will create the sense of immersion sooner, because there are still things to see and to do, there are other people. Just like in a video game, when you walk through Castle Wolfenstein without Nazis, nothing to do. Kind of maybe a bad example, but yeah, okay. Sure, we don't shoot people. Roland just said, what did you say? You said a real great thing, actually.
Because you are in the experience, you are in our play, you can constant reflect yourself on those visitors.
Yeah.
It's like they don't have that experience and you do, and it's kind of all going on a constant. So
Good
that's
point. Yeah, sure.
That's a good